Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Louise Larson, and I have a small consulting practice in New Jersey, guiding families through the college admissions process. And last year, I ran a series of monthly webinars that I took the summer off, and then I never got back to in the fall because I was running some pilot programs, experimenting with different ways to offer group consulting to families. And I just never got started again. And a couple of different things happened. Um, One was I got the pilot groups all organized. So the pilot groups are ready to go. And I wasn't doing them anymore. And I was wondering if I should come back to doing these. And two things happened. One parent said to me, "Hey, you know, if you're still doing those webinars, I would really like to come to them." And I was like, "Oh, I did stop. Um, I did stop, but I was thinking about redoing them." And then what really got me back was one of my biological children is looking at to possibly apply to law school. And then all of a sudden, I was on the other side of the table. Like, where is the law school? Like, I was like, how do you get the application? And I have parents say to me, like, where's the Common App? And I'm like, so now I'm on the other side of the table, like racked with anxiety, trying to figure out how do you apply to law school. And I was like, oh my gosh, these poor parents that like, you know, I totally, after being on the other side of the table, which I still am on the other side of the table for law school, I was like, I totally need to do webinars because, it's confusing and it's stressful. And so I did a bunch of webinars last year and I'm like, well, I've had maybe have to repeat some stuff, but it's okay to repeat stuff. And I tell you, feel free to, if you get a video copy of this, you can send it to a friend. I don't care. Anybody can come to these webinars. You don't have to work with me to come to them. If you want to follow me on Facebook, I have a parent group I call it on Facebook, Two River College Admissions, where I post relevant material and articles and information. I have Instagram too, and I don't even know what it is. I think it's august.consulting is my Instagram. And I'm also going to put these on a YouTube channel just to make them available to people. And I'll put the webinars from last year on there too. So I just want to be a resource for people because it is very confusing. It's very stressful. And having starting to sit on the other side of the table, trying to help a kid figure out law school is, I was like, my gosh, I need to do this. So I'm going to do, I'm doing April, I'll do May, I'll do June, take July and August off, and I promise I'll come back in September. As far as my availability, I could maybe take one or two more juniors on a comprehensive package. I'm always happy to work with people hourly. I will be running a group program. A lot of people have asked me in the past years, I don't need a full package. I need more than hourly. Do you have something in the middle? And I never really did, but I think I do now. So I do have an option for people that maybe want some guidance, but not a full comprehensive package. So this is an ideal time to talk about the 2023 admission cycle because last week, the bulk of the last decisions came out. So this is the perfect time to really kind of talk about the 2023 cycle, what it looked like, and what does it mean moving forward if you have a child coming up the pipeline somewhere between 8th and 11th grade. So I'm just going to share a couple of current events, details, small things, and then I'm going to dig into the 2023 cycle and talk about the test optional component of it and what the changes will look like for the online SAT. So first of all, the Common App prompts are going to stay the exact same. So there will be no change in the Common App prompts. That's stable. And if you have a kid that wants to get started on that, they can. There is a college fair at the Javits Center on April 23rd from 12 to 4. What sometimes people don't know is that the person that you might meet at the Javits Center at a school you might be thinking about is probably the person that will do the first read of your application. So if you decide to go to the Javits Center, what you should do, your child should, be clean and comb their hair, and they should be engaging with these people. And what they will do is say, hi, their name, I'm a junior at such and such school, and I'm thinking about applying, or I'm thinking about visiting. Just that's all they have to say. And these people are trained to talk to adolescents. They will take the conversation away, and your kid will feel like $1 million. They are not really there to talk to parents. I mean, if you really have a specific question, like, hey, I'm wondering about your biology program in some detail. If you really have a question, that's okay. But they should really be interfacing with the kids. The FAFSA, this is the form for financial aid, the federal form for financial aid. They are rolling this out in a new format. And it was supposed to be released October 1st. That's been pushed back to December 1st. And that is quite problematic, because if you apply binding early decision and you're waiting on a financial aid notification, you probably won't get that in time for the January deadlines. So if you have a kid applying binding early decision this fall and you're waiting on financial aid, you need to know that there might be a little bit of an issue there. If you are applying binding early decision, any other schools you're looking at, if you say you were to not get in, probably have January 1st or January 15th deadline. So if you don't have your financial aid package by then, it's a problem. I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell you, I think the whole thing could get pushed back, because they've already pushed it back. I think that the FAFSA redo could get pushed back a year. The issue with the new financial aid formula that would impact a family is it's very hard to qualify for financial aid, for need-based aid. But some families can qualify for need-based aid when they have 2 children in college. So once you have, maybe you're full pay for child number 1, but when child number 2 joins and you're paying 2 tuitions, you could potentially qualify for financial aid. And on the new plan, they've eliminated that option. So if you don't qualify for child 1, you're probably not going to qualify for child 2. But if they move it back a year, you might. I don't know. Stay tuned on that one. The New York Times put out a fantastic piece. Frank Bruni's column was written by Jeff Selingo. Frank Bruni and Jeff Selingo have both written wonderful books. Frank Bruni's book is called Where You Go Is on Who You Will Be, and Jeff Selingo's book is called Who Gets In and Why. They're great books. And so the piece that Jeff Selingo wrote was really great. They put in 10 reflections from recent college graduates on what they might have done differently, which were very good. And they also offered up a new ranking tool, which is to kind of give an alternative to the U.S. News and World Report. I played with the ranking tool. I think it has its merits. Anything's better than U.S. News and World Report. I think that U.S. News and World Report is probably going by the wayside. Their rankings are just not useful. Colorado College and Bard College recently pulled out and said we won't cooperate with the rankings anymore. Reed College in Portland, Oregon pulled out of the rankings years ago. So the New York Times information, if you have a kid coming up the pipeline, is good stuff in there. So what I'm going to do now is shift gears and talk about the 2023 cycle, and hopefully carry a thread through to have it all connect. The 2023 Common App data, and what I would suggest you do is I would suggest paper and pencil, because I'm going to share a lot of information. I don't have beautiful graphics. If I waited to have beautiful graphics, I would probably never get this presentation done. It's not my strong suit. So what I suggest is if you have paper and pencil to kind of jot some of this down, and then if you need me to repeat anything or you have questions about it, I'm going to give you a lot of facts and information. Hold on a second. So here we go. This year in the common application, there was a 21% increase in distinctive first-year applicants. So 21% more actual applicants. They went from 1,028,000 and change to 1,244,000 and change. So that's 216,000 extra new applicants. International applicants were up 3 times their application levels in 2020. Now, the 2020 applicants were not the pandemic applicants. So international applicants have tripled. They are usually full pay. So colleges are eager to recruit them. So the increase, the extra 200,000 applicants submitted in total an application volume up 30% from 2020. So instead of in 2020, 5,434,000 plus applications went out. This year, a little over 7 million went out. So not only did the distinct applicants go up, they submitted more applications. So the other number to note is that 43% of them were sending test scores. So that's a big jump up. And what that led to was, I'm going to give you a couple of numbers from a couple of different schools. And why this has become harder to predict when you're building a list, would a child potentially get into one of these schools? I'm going to start with Tufts University. Now, this is a small, medium-sized school in Boston, quite selective. They had 34,000 applications, and they took 9.5% of those applicants were admitted. This is a 50% gain from their 2020 pool and a 75% increase from their 2016 pool. 40% now, and I promise you this, we'll get this data over the summer, but of those candidates that were admitted, a chunk of them, probably half or more of the class, was admitted by an early decision, which means the regular decision admit rate was probably, I'm guessing, between 5 and 6%. If you're just a regular applicant applying in the spring. At Tufts, 40% were admitted test optional. So 40% of the admitted pool applied test without test scores. 50% of the applicant pool applied without test scores. So what that means is half the kids applied with scores, half applied without scores. But when the admitted pool only has 40% of the admitted pool had test scores, that means 60% didn't. 60% did have test scores. So when you go to colleges and they say we are test optional, that's great. But if they don't share the numbers, the breakout of like, this is what we had coming in, you can see at Tufts, kids with scores had an advantage. Just a little heads up on Tufts, they offered about 3,000 students the wait list. 3,000 students a wait list for an enrolled freshman class of 1,800. So when you get a wait list at a selective school, it's usually a lot closer to a no, because last year they didn't take anybody off the wait list. And the year before, they took 8 students off the wait list. So Boston University. Now, if you are a parent of a student that is approaching the college age, anybody in the 80s and maybe the 90s could have probably gone to Boston University. That has changed. They got 80,484 applications for a freshman class of 3,100. Last year, they took 47% of their freshman class early decision. This year, they took 57% early decision. So if you're applying to these schools, test optional, regular decision, it is an uphill. At Boston University, 41% sent scores. I don't have data on what the accepted pool looked like. Northeastern, 96,327 applications. That is up 50% from 2020. They are bringing in a freshman class of about 3,000. So you can, again, they're bringing in about a third of that class is probably coming in early decision. So it's tough. So when I share all this with you, I'm trying to give you a little bit of the landscape. UVA shared some data. Again, I'm including University of Virginia because it's public. So when you have to understand, when you're looking at a public school, they're going to probably treat in-state and out-of-state students differently. So they are up from 51,000 applications last year. They're up to over 56,000. Acceptance rate in-state was 27%. Acceptance rate out-of-state was 12%. UVA is going to expect their out-of-state kids to probably have test scores more often than not. So this leads to very hard to predict for the regular decision round who's going to get in, who isn't. I had a couple kids waiting last week on very selective schools. They were each waiting for 3, and each of them got a denial, a wait list, and an acceptance. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason to how that came down. I had a kid this year, he was denied early action at a pretty manageable admissions threshold at a pretty manageable state flagship. He was denied in December early action. And the week later, he got into a pretty selective school, ED2. I was like, I don't even know what to say. So I share all that with you because when you say, if you said to me, what is driving all this? How is this gotten perhaps more chaotic than it was before the pandemic? And I have my stuff in all different places. So bear with me while I shift gears to my next little bit of information. So the reason this has gotten so confusing and chaotic is because of test optional admissions. Before the pandemic, when kind of everybody went test optional for a while, there was some pieces in play that you might have had everything. You might have had the rigor, the grades, the extracurriculars, the leadership, you hit all the demographic notes, you were a legacy, whatever. But if you didn't have the test scores, your likelihood of getting into a really selective school was not very good. And I had a kid early on. This kid's probably pushing 30 now. This kid had everything. They were from a remote region of Washington State. They were a Brown Dartmouth legacy. They were nationally award-winning science. They had all the rigor, 750 English, SAT, athlete, musician. I mean, the only thing the kid wasn't bringing was like an underrepresented racial component. She had a 550 on the math, and there was no way she was going to get in with that. So that was it. She wasn't going to get in. Now you can be that kid and say, I can apply to Michigan and Duke because they're not going to, I don't need my test scores, and I'm a rock star. And there's a lot of rock stars that just don't have the SAT scores. And the SAT is an Army aptitude test from World War II. I mean, you have to wear it in its proper context. So now everybody can apply everywhere. And I get a lot of kids saying, what's the harm? Why wouldn't I try? And so we have more applicants applying to more schools. And that's why schools like Northeastern have 96,000 applications and Tufts is up 75%. So I'm going to talk about test optional admissions. and some of the realities of that. And then I'm going to go into the what the factors are for the online SAT moving forward for freshmen and sophomores. Okay, so what you have to know about test optional admissions is that there is a tier of schools that were test optional before the pandemic. So these schools that were test optional before the pandemic, when you find those schools, and I would give you an example of one is Bates. Bates College in Maine was one of the very first schools to ever say, we're not going to use test scores. They did it a long time ago, and good for them. And there are schools that really will evaluate you very holistically without test scores. When you're sitting at parent info sessions or, prospective student info sessions, and they say we evaluate holistically, one question to ask is, were you test optional before the pandemic? And where is your data? Because if they're not showing you, and I remember, I think the first year that they were test optional, University of Pennsylvania, like put it all out there, like X applied test optional, X applied with scores. Here's how they all got in or didn't. And if they're not showing you the data, you don't know what they're doing really. So here's the thing about test optional admissions. This is a marketing piece. This is an ability to say you should apply because we're test optional, and the more applications they get, the more selective they are. It allows them to get more applications and increase selectivity. It also allows them to cherry pick students without test scores that really fulfill their institutional needs. This could be an athlete. This could be a student that's bringing a demographic piece. So they can use that to bypass test scores and say, we really want this Hart player from North Dakota. So they can just come. We don't care about their test scores. The other thing in this test optional world underlying all this is that the University of California system is test blind. So that means like they will like never see your scores. You don't even choose to send your scores. So when they're test blind, there's like 550,000 high school graduates in California, and there's not enough seats for them at the UCs and the Cal State system. So every college in the country is recruiting in California, and the average California kid might not bother to test because they're hoping to go to one of the UCs and they're test blind. So if you want to recruit California kids, you're going to get more of them if they don't have to send scores. So there's this whole underbelly of test optional that for the average kid might not be necessarily that advantageous. So you just have to kind of be a very discerning parent, because this isn't something an adolescent can really do, and kind of listen to how they talk about test scores. What have they been test optional for 20 years? And if not, are they showing you the data? The other thing I will share with you about this is, the other thing is about test optional is there are certain majors that might be much more test optional friendly than, say, engineering or a pre-pharmacy program or something like that. Test optional would be impacted by major. So something else to think about. So let's see, what else did I want to tell you? Was there anything else about test optional? So I'm going to shift gears now towards more about testing. And this was from a webinar I attended with a guy named Adam Ingersoll, and he runs a group called Compass Test Prep in California. And he's been doing this for 30 years. And the Compass Test Prep website is loaded with information, blogs, practice tests, like, it's just, he puts he's very generous, puts a lot of resources out there. So, I will quote him. He said, testing was a mess, and now it is a bigger mess. It's confusing, people don't know what to do. And so here are some of the things to think about. As a parent, you are going to have to be a very savvy consumer and decide how much you're going to put into this. Good scores are not a silver bullet to getting into a college. So one of the challenges is that the decision to commit to testing and prep and can often have to be made before you really know where your child really even wants to go, what kind of schools are on his list or her list. So that's one of the things. It's a catch-22. You don't know, do I need the scores? And it's an approach that you're going to constantly have to revisit and evaluate, because at some point you might have to conclude, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We tested a couple of times, or, you know, for whatever reason, the scores aren't coming on, or the schools your child's really gravitating to are genuinely holistic and will really look at them. So I would encourage you to really kind of be true to yourself. And if the whole soccer team is testing for the 5th time and you don't want to, just, that's okay. He cited a New England boarding school that he went to for a lecture, and he said, you know, this is not the most selective, not the least selective boarding school. He said 100% of their student body fully engages with testing and preps and tests, and at the end of the day, 25% of them ended up sending scores. And this is just not that valuable or sustainable. And you know, who knows what the role of testing will be moving forward. It just becomes a big decision for a family, and there's not necessarily a whole lot of transparency from the colleges. One of the challenges, if you do have scores, is then you'd have to decide, am I going to send these scores to which schools? I had a kid call me up. This was just a kid I knew personally, one of my kids' friends, and they said, I've got a 750 on English and a 550 on math. Do I send these scores to Middlebury? And I was like, you know, and Adam Ingersoll said, it is very hard to figure out, do these scores enhance or do they not? So even if your child tests, unless they're in the 1500 range, you're going to have to probably go school by school and start to discern, do these scores enhance my profile at the school or not? Let's see. So there are schools that are test blind, like completely test blind. You can't send them your scores. And there are some schools that require test scores. So, you know, the Georgia Publics, the Florida Publics, MIT requires test scores. MIT put out a whole missive on why they're requiring scores. Caltech put out a whole missive on why they're not requiring scores. Purdue's requiring scores. The Air Force is requiring scores. So some of these schools are requiring scores. Some of them are test blind. Everybody else is more like in this gray middle. And so what you really have to do is listen and look at the website and see if there's any signals. Georgetown says point blank, we are test preferred. Like, unless you live in the bush of Alaska, like, you can probably test, and we probably expect test scores unless there's some really extenuating circumstance. If schools are continuing to say that they're temporarily test optional, it probably indicates that there's some conflict on campus around it, that there's a group for it, a group against it, and that it is probably test preferred. The thing about the testing that you have to realize is that 2/3 of kids have A's. And he said, and it's true, he said, you know, a B is the new D. I mean, you know, if you have a B, it's like, oh my gosh. So test scores, there's a lot of kids with very high GPAs, but it's not as common to see high GPAs and high test scores. So colleges do lean into these scores to start to sort out like, okay, this kid has a high GPA. Oh, they have high test scores too. The other thing you need to know is that when they're not using test scores, they're going to have to lean into other ways to evaluate your child. Their writing, their letters to rec. One of the things that they will look at is AP scores. Now, if your child has taken an AP as a junior, so those scores come out over the summer, they will have AP scores for their applications. So AP course grades are, again, often very inflated, but the kids, it's a much lower group of kids that are doing very well grade-wise in AP courses and getting 4s and 5s on the test. So just something to be aware of, that if you are a junior taking APs and you have good scores, colleges could lean into that. I know that the UCs were leaning more into the APs in lieu of the SAT. All right, so let's talk about the digital SAT. If you have a 9th or 10th grader, so the 11th graders will be taking the paper SAT. The 10th graders will be taking the digital PSAT, and they will take the digital SAT in the spring of 2024. The only reason a rising junior would be taking the SAT this fall would be if maybe to put hard scores on the table for athletic recruiting, or if they're just a really hard charger and that's kind of organically part of what they do because they're just, that type of kid. The average high school kid should not, that is a rising junior, shouldn't worry about testing this fall. The data says that testing is, the peak scores are late in 11th grade and early in 12th grade. So if nobody with a 8th, 9th, or 10th grader should worry about trying to get the paper SAT, and not necessary. Let's see. The one thing you need to know, to think about, is the ACT is going to be its same old self this year. When the SAT rolls over, it's going to have a library of practice. It is going to have the same format. So it's got a robust materials to prep. And so one option, if the new SAT does not feel good, is to just stick with the ACT. The ACT will be going digital too. 10th graders might be able to take a digital SAT, but 9th graders definitely will be able to take an SAT, a digital ACT. They are under the gun to roll this out because everybody's watching testing dissipate a little bit with a test optional wave. And the College Board has AP testing for a revenue source and the PSAT for a revenue source. ACT does not have those other revenue streams. So they're going to be really looking to roll out their online test. So the nuts and bolts of the new SAT are that it is a 2-hour and 14-minute test, which is a lot shorter than the current SAT. It is shorter. It is not necessarily easier. They say they will super score it. No one's put that in writing. I think they probably will. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't. The difference between the new SAT and the paper SAT is that there's an adaptivity component. So everybody will get the first module that is exactly the same. But after that, there will be kind of a fork in the road, and you will get one of 2 different modules. The majority of the scale of the scores are available on both modules. So you shouldn't really be that stressed, like I got to get the harder module. So if you were going to score in the high 600s, you will get the harder module. You shouldn't worry about the adaptive structure. You should just go do your best. The thing about the harder module, it's not necessarily harder. And for the SAT, and this is something you need to know, is they want people taking the SAT. The College Board wants you to come take their test. So they are under the gun to have these tests score well enough so that people say, hey, I do want to take this test. So they're under the gun to kind of make sure that their scores, are on the proper bell curve. And so don't worry so much about the modules. There are fewer questions. There's more time per question. There's more weight on each question. It's going to punish careless errors. There's 54 questions in the reading. Currently on the ACT, there's 115. Pedagogically, it's the same. The reading passages are a lot shorter. The other thing that I thought was interesting about the online SAT, there's an item response theory. Now, this is not my milieu, but what this is three kids could miss the same number of questions, but have different scores because they have a more sophisticated way to value your answers. And my understanding of that, and I could be wrong here, but I think what it means is one of the wrong answers might be better than one of the other wrong answers. So Adam Ingersoll said you shouldn't really be worried about this. There's no way to know this. There's no way to start to figure that out. So that is what so if you have a 10th grader, they will take the fall PSAT will be online, and the spring 2024, this will roll over. So what I wanted to leave you with, because, my goal is always to help families alleviate stress. And when I was kind of putting all my notes together for this, I was like, I wonder if I'm alleviating stress here with this. I don't know if I am, but I was on a webinar with a guy named Peter Van Buskend. He's been in this industry for decades. And, he said, what he would advise parents. And he had three things, and I'm going to add a fourth. He said parents should not worry about reputation. There's wonderful schools out there that are hidden gems, and they're not playing the game that some of the schools are with early decision and kind of trying to get their numbers up. He said parents should address costs right out of the gate. Be very open about what is realistic for your family, what feels comfortable for you, so that you and your child can move forward as a team, and that will help alleviate stress. The other thing he said was, don't listen to the chatter. Just don't listen to the chatter. Let people talk and don't engage in it. It's not productive. And the fourth thing that I would add to that is, students who really are allowed to drive their own process through this arrive on campuses much more clear on why they're there, motivated to succeed. If they own their college admissions process, then when they get to that college, they can own the process when they get there. If they are kind of led through it by their parents and kind of dropped out of college, they're like, I didn't even, the kids that have a lot of agency in this process tend to fare better than if they didn't. Now, as a parent who has done this, I'm not going to say there aren't terrifying moments when you say, what do you think you want to, I'm not saying that's easy, but I'm just saying that if you can take your 8th and 9th grader and start to just, have conversations around this and let them lead the process, they will probably arrive on campus better equipped to own whatever challenges they might come there, might come while they're there. Didn't say it was easy. And my youngest is a freshman in college now, so I don't have to do this anymore. And I was actually laughing, saying I could have a webinar on what it was actually like for me to do this. So it might seem like I'm sitting here in this office with all the answers. I did not have all the answers, and it wasn't always pretty. And I could almost have a webinar of true stories of what it was like at my house. But I loved this quote from Peter Van Busken, and this is what I'm going to leave you with. He said, "Done well, the whole college process, before you ever get to college, is about self-discovery. The kind of lessons that come out of it for the young person can be as powerful as anything that takes place during the 4 years of college." So I am going to turn off the recording now, and